that soup after his name, which he definitely does, so I'm going to do my best. First, he's a doctor of chiropractic. He's got a degree in clinical chiropractic nutrition. He's a doctor of chiropractic. He's got a diplomat in chiropractic nutrition. He's also got a diplomat in applied kinesiology. Nutridyne and Asher Allen, if you haven't met him yet this weekend, is sponsoring Dr. Bob. So thank you Nutridyne for your support. Dr. Rakowski is a board certified kinesiologist, certified clinical nutritionist, certified biological terrain instructor, and the clinic director of the Natural Medicine Center in Houston, Texas. In addition to running a busy practice, Dr. Rakowski has lectured internationally for over 3 decades on various topics related to natural and lifestyle medicine, happiness, and success. He has appeared on numerous television programs and international talk shows. He is a recognized expert in functional endocrinology and in-office diagnostic procedures to assess nutritional status. His clinical experience ranges from treating elite professional athletes to critically ill patients with a variety of cancers and autoimmune. And we all have patients like that, so definitely, ask Dr. Rakowski some questions and participate today. And please welcome me into Dr.
I'd like to start out with different concepts and quotes that I've learned over the years. It was probably 30 years ago. I was listening to a radio show at the time, right? They had radio and podcasts. And this guy was kind of being grilled. They said, so tell us about this unproven concept that nutrition is alternative medicine. And the guy just laughed hysterically. He says, what? Nutrition is not alternative medicine. Nutrition is the foundation of life. So, see how far you get without it. And if we optimize it, if we optimize our foundation, can we expect to get a better existence? I like learning from greats that come before me, and Les Brown, still with us, amazing character. He says, whenever you give a talk to any group of people, they want to know 3 things. Number 1, who are you? What do you have? And why should I listen to you? We don't have audio, but look at the pictures on the right, and you'll see many of these people, world champions from every major professional sport. Actually, is a good friend of Eric Berry, and he came to see me, and it was interesting enough, he had a really good testimonial. I was asking him, who's the toughest person to play against in the NFL? He says, Bob, it's got to be Tom Brady. And what makes Tom Brady so tough? Well, he's like the offensive coordinator. He's like the quarterback. He can change things on the fly. He just knows how all things connect on the field, and he'll find the vulnerability and make it happen, no matter how he needs to change the play. And he says, Bob, I see you that way. Now, how did I get that way? Interestingly enough, when I was in chiropractic college, I made a decision. I wanted to be not just a good chiropractor, but a great chiropractor. Oddly enough, what I found out is that a great chiropractor does more than adjust. So I saw a guy named John Bandy, and he had a picture of Carl Lewis on his wall. And at the time, Carl Lewis was the most decorated Olympian. He had won medals in 4 consecutive Olympics. Pretty rare for track and field. Most speedsters are going to max out speed 25, 26, 27, not still competing at 40. So I said, well, how do you treat someone like Carl Lewis? He said, well, that's easy. I just became really good at what I do. Okay, cool. What do you do? He says, well, I'm a chiropractor, so I'm good at moving bones. Hopefully everybody that's a chiropractor here is good at moving bones, right? We may have a lot of different techniques to do that, but ultimately we want things to work better. He said, we are what we eat, so I decided I was going to master nutrition, but not just nutrition to sustain my life, but to actually help me thrive. He says, muscles move bones. They do a better job of that than chiropractors. Think about it, it's their divine purpose. They do it 24/7, 365. So in order to understand muscles, I became a kinesiologist. He said, everything's energy. So I realized that if I need to master energy, I want to do things like meditation and centering myself. And certainly acupuncture is a better way to move energy. And I thought, well, thank you, Dr. John. You just created my entire curriculum. So I got postgraduate certifications in all those areas and more within my first 3 years of clinical practice. And by the way, I treated my first world champion 2 years in, and many, many, many since. But let's look at the other end of the spectrum. This was one of the most powerful articles that I ever read, and it was entitled "The Role of Performance Enhancing Sports Nutraceuticals," essentially, in the role of critical care medicine. And what they found out is the same strategies that help the best of the best to thrive can keep the most challenged alive. We all need oxygen. We all need nutrient delivery. We all need acid-alkaline balance. We all need inflammatory control. And better than that, we probably all need a purpose to live and thrive and work for what we're working for. So I have seen the other end of the spectrum. When you look at that foot was given a death sentence. It was supposed to be amputated 2 days from the day that picture was taken. But look at it 2 weeks later. And here's our first clinical pearl. Bodies respond to frequency, duration, intensity, quality, and timing of stimuli. So if I were to ask you, if you put a natural molecule, I don't care if it's an herb or a vitamin or a mineral or whatever in your body, and you're trying to move the body in a certain direction, anybody familiar with the term half-life? I guess we all are. What's the typical half-life of a natural molecule? Any guesses?
3.14.
Ha! 3.14159, right? We can take pi to a gazillion digits, but no, it's less than that unless you're talking minutes. It's typically less than an hour. So you put something in your body, an hour later, whatever type of pushing effect, nudging effect, nurturing effect is half reduced in an hour. Now, I've also heard that the term nutritional toxicity is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist, right? There's a contradiction within it. Nutrients are not toxic. Now, could someone do something profoundly isolated, out of balance, and, take it so much that they cause them a problem? Sure. But we can all name everybody who's died from nutrient overdose in the last decades, and we know them by name, their social security number, where they live, because it's exactly zero. People don't die from too much nutrition, they die from too little. So when I took that foot and wanted to bring it back, we've got to get blood sugar regulation, we've got inflammatory control, we've got to get anti-infection, we need to improve nitric oxide. And think about that, athletes want all those things too, dosing things every hour, look at it 2 weeks later, look at it 17 months later. Now, why do I show Dr. Dale Bredesen there in his book, The End of Alzheimer's? Because he realized that just what we did with that foot, you can do with the brain. Whenever there's a problem with any tissue or organ within the body, there are 3 distinct zones of cells. There are cells that are dead. Hey, there's nothing we can do about that. There are cells that are fine. There's nothing we need to do about that. But in between are cells that are functional but not functioning. So look at that foot. Dead, I see plenty of dead. Fine, I don't see any fine. But I guess we all underestimated what was functional but not functioning. Now, that foot came back, how nice. But we've done it with people on cardiac transplant lists. Yeah, a guy with 11% ejection fraction, and I got these things on my YouTube video. Good luck finding those. During COVID, a lot of us got censored really, really hard. Still haven't bounced back from that. Imagine sharing truth when the world needs truth and saying, oh no, we're not gonna let you share truth. I do like that quote, right? The truth shall set us free. A lot of people are wishing they'd listened to that truth. Different story altogether there. But nonetheless, so a heart, guy 11% ejection fraction, 10 days later we had him at 33% off of cardiac transplant list. He'd been under care for 8 years, taking tons of drugs, not making any progress, and they said, well, you probably die before you get a heart. Well, how wonderful that we brought that back. Yeah, we've done it with lungs. We've done it with liver. We've done it with kidney, and I've got all these people on video, so it's not just me saying, here's the before, here's the after, and we've done it with brains. Now, a little harder to show with brains, unless, of course, you go to the video I have of someone with Parkinson's, and you see this woman shaking like this and trying to draw a spiral, and then 6 weeks later, no trouble. How did that happen? Sections of her substantia nigra, there were cells that were dead. Hey, nothing we can do about that. There are cells that were fine. Nothing we need to do about that. But what do we empower? Cells that were functional, but not functioning. And I promise you that can work with every single organ system. So over 10,000 hours on 6 different continents, I've shared data about how to enhance human health. So we're gonna have a couple different parts to this. The first part is sports nutrition. And when I talked to Georgia, they said, you know, how about something hands-on, which can be a little challenging to do with a group with this. But in part 2, we're gonna hopefully we have some volunteers from the audience that have some type of physical challenge that they're working with. And we'll show what I think is what I know is a very proven protocol to make very fast differences and get people on a better track. So first principles, I was actually at a success conference last year. And Tom Bellew, who's got a podcast called Impact Theory, and started a company called Quest Nutrition, sold it for $400 million. And the first question was, Tom, what the heck? You know his background. He was a guy that was really struggling. He asked his father-in-law, can I have permission to marry your daughter? And he said, well, I already give you permission. You got no future. You know, you're doing nothing. You can't even make a sandwich. So why would I give you permission? Well, that kind of hit him to the core. He says, yeah, maybe I ought to do something with my life. Now worth $400 million, not a bad deal. But they said, Tom, what turned you around? He said, I started learning from people that were really excelling. And they based what they did on first principles. And when we start looking at our education system, I'm a huge fan of education, but the 4 C's of education are communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and cooperation. So are we being taught that? Especially the critical thinking component. Trust the science. Actually, the first scientist should be told, don't trust the science. Test, retest, evolve. Or as John Maxwell says, I know there's 2 things. One, there's always an answer, and then there's always a better answer. But first principles basically are the principles that are going to run really this entire physical universe and beyond. They're foundational truths. They work everywhere, every time. And the best of the best say that it is the foundation for anything that you want to achieve. So some very famous first principle thinkers, Aristotle, very, very interesting. He said, here's what I know nothing. Well, think about that. Compared to what we could know, what do we know? A microfraction. Doesn't mean we can't take that microfraction and expand on it and build on it, but if we think we know everything, that's definitely a spiral downward. And then all the others that are listed there as well. But I asked AI, and I like having conversations with AI. Consider that some AI is a little filtered, a little censored, but you have to know enough to ask the question and then at least question the answer, because there's always a better answer. But they said these first principles work everywhere, every time, unchanged by technology. So then I asked this question, are there first principles related to health? And they come up with these 7. Now maybe it's because I asked the question, because I'm a huge fan of 7s. You've got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every day. Those are the magnificent 7 of life. We're mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, impactful beings. Those are the 7 things in areas that we live and thrive. But notice the magnificent 7 of health. First thing starts with energy. So I might ask the question, when your energy stops, how much time do you have to live?
0.
I like interaction.
3 minutes.
You say 3 minutes. Let me tell you what the literature says. The moment your energy stops, you're dead. There is no more life left when energy's gone. It's just gone. Life is energy. Now we might suggest that maybe that energy just went from the physical body and somewhere else. I tend to like to think of it that way. But then I asked the question, maybe I should go back to those other 7 as well. So next is homeostasis. We have to stay in balance. Raw materials. We all have heard you are what you eat. That's kind of true. You are what you absorb. That's more true. And keep in mind that a lot of people have maldigestion. You are what you don't eliminate. That's most true. So here's a crazy question. If you breathe in just 0.1% more than you breathe out, how long would you live?
Same.
How long?
Same. A lot of time.
You think you wouldn't live 7 hours. You can ask AI this question right now. If you take the vital capacity of the lungs and you fill it 0.1%, 1/1000th more than you exhale, you got 7 hours. Now, if you live 80 years, that's roughly 700,000 hours. So just being 0.1% off, you cut your life expectancy by 100,000. And it's worse if you exhale 0.1% more than you inhale. You only got 2.5 hours then. But don't take my word on it. Go to AI and ask if a human being breathes in 0.1% more than they exhale, how long will they live? And they'll calculate it out so beautifully, your lungs are going to explode. You can't get by like that. You've got to match eliminating what you're taking in once you're done with it. Period. End of story. We have to be able to adapt to stress. The AI said align with evolutionary design. I'm more with divine design. I'll take that over evolution any day. Clear your toxins and know that the mind and body are interconnected. But then I also asked AI, all right, so we've got a lot of ways of changing physical health, treating patients. How much do vitamins and minerals resonate, agree with the first principles of health? Here's what AI said, 100%. How about phytochemicals, plant nutrients? Well, you might be surprised that's only 90%. Well, one man's food's another man's poison. We didn't come up with this today. That was a couple thousand years ago, a guy named Lucretius. 2,000 years ago, even one man's food was another man's poison. Now I ask the question, how much do drugs align with health? Ouch, 0%. They're toxins. Try living on those. You're gonna die. So the lowest dose, shortest duration. So the great news is here at this conference, you've got lots of great nutraceutical companies. Nutridyne sponsoring this event, super high level, committed to their doctors, but the drug companies have spent over $20 billion since 2017 buying up nutraceutical companies. And here's what I would encourage you to do. Don't take my word on anything. Verify it. If we actually heard people and said, let me see if this actually resonates with truth. So why would the drug companies with 1,000x markup on a product invest in companies that typically have about a 40% markup in product? You're in business, you want 1,000% on your efforts or 40%? Probably 1,000 if you're counting the dollars. But we know they're not interested in the dollars. So what they do, they just realize if people need nutrition, we're gonna buy nutrition companies. You think that's the story? Or do you think maybe they go, these people might be costing us money? How many drugs do healthy people take?
None.
The answer ought to be 0. I remember being at a conference, it was a ridiculous question, and I'll ask it to you, how much overweight should a 50-year-old be? How much overweight should a 30-year-old be?
None.
The answer is none. So why do we accept that? How much towards, yesterday I was listening to, the speaker didn't like the term pre-diabetes. He says, no. Let's just call it insulin resistance or insulin problems because pre-diabetes frames it as a pre-problem. No, you got problem. You're just closer to it being a more serious problem. So we want to be optimal. Now I've actually used this chart for decades and I always thought it was a pretty good chart. And then I looked at it through a different set of eyes. You ever look at something different and see something different when you're changed? So look what they have normal. Anybody see anything unusual about normal?
That's not what good happened.
It's a micron above ill. If you're just this close to ill, you're normal. Why wouldn't we put normal over here? Isn't that interesting? But how many people are vibrantly healthy? And are they beating down your door? Now, interestingly enough, it makes a really good percentage of my practice. A really good percentage. And that's by design. Hey, we want to take you from where you are to where you want to be, and we want to keep you there. How long do you think we should partner in that? Well, the answer would be as long as it's a win-win. So people need to be coming in my door, seeing a better, stronger, faster, smarter me with new tools, new technologies, new way to deliver, and they need to be able to expect that they're going to walk away with not just a fair exchange for what they paid, but an exceptional exchange. I read a book on customer service years ago, and it said, look, customers don't expect to be pleased or satisfied. Actually, that's not entirely true. What the book said is our goal is not to please or satisfy our customers. Our goal is to amaze them. People expect to be pleased and satisfied. They tell their friends when they're amazed. So we want to amaze them every way that we can. Talking about amazing individual, Tom Rath, Amazon.com's best-selling author. How old would you guess Tom Rath is in that picture right there? 45 is the right answer if you knew that. When was he given a death sentence, do you know? At age 15. And how long was he supposed to live? Barely into his 30s. And they said, look, he lost the genetic lottery, you've got tumor, he lost his eyeball to a tumor. They said you got tumors in your lungs, your liver, your kidney, your adrenals, your spine, your ribs. Don't consider getting married because you'll pass these horrible genes on to your kids. Wow, thank you for painting a big picture for me. May I have another? Well, there he is at 45, happily married, 2 beautiful kids that didn't get what he got. And the title of his book is Eat, Move, Sleep, because he found out, when I eat right for me, which is basically a whole foods, low keto, calorie restricted, intermittent fasting state, which probably is good guidelines for all of us, my body seems to respond better, but better than that, my tumors shrink. And he's been scanned every 6 months since age 15 when he lost that eyeball. He found out when I exercise, not too hard, because too hard can push you backwards, and not too little, it's actually good for my tumors in my body. And for him, he had to allow 10 hours of sleep or 10 hours budgeted every night to get enough restorative sleep to get that same result. Now, when I asked AI to rate the Magnificent Seven, this is the order. Eat right. So let me ask you a question. For who of you is nutrition your top priority in your world for creating a great life? Really? Can we change that? Based on this information, who thinks we should maybe put a little more information on nutrition? All right, half of us, or maybe 2/3. The other third, I want to have a private conversation. What do you know to be better than this? Then sleep is number 2, move is number 3. Why would drink right be number 4? Because if you're eating right, you should have very high water content foods. Poop right, we don't eliminate. It's not just bowels, it's lungs, it's liver, it's kidneys, it's lymphatic, it's sweat. All those things can eliminate. Think right. Well, you got to do everything else in place to think right. And then I thought, okay, the 7 life areas: mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, impactful. What's critical to creating a great life? They said, if you don't have your physical right, you're screwed. So that's great for our profession. We tend to focus on the physical, but then we go back. What did they say was number 1 thing for thriving? It's our nutrition. It's our sleep. Physical came in at number 3, unless you consider that eating right is the foundation for everything. Eat junk, you are junk. I once heard a powerful quote a couple of years ago. There's no such thing as junk food. There's junk and there's food. Don't confuse the two. And 73% of what people are eating in this country, highly processed total crap. So Sir Richard Branson, interesting character, billionaire, very, very fit in his 70s, still a very, very successful life. I was at another success conference and he was being interviewed. They said, what would you advise new entrepreneurs? He says, get crazy fit. Get really, really, really fit. Now, I want you to think about that. Who in this room is in the best shape of their entire life? Right here, right now. Good for you. We got a couple of them. I'm not, but I'm not bad, right? At 60, I promise you, I've taken a few steps back from 20, but not as many as my other 60-year-old friends. Having fun at dinner last night, on Tuesday, I'm playing basketball with my 30-year-old son and his 30-year-old friends, and guess what? I can do it. I'm competitive. Now, I've lost a few steps since 20. I'm not going to dunk on it. I'm going to play smart. I'm going to position myself because I know I've lost a step, especially with a ruptured Achilles. Sorry, I've been hard on my body, and a total hip replacement 6 months ago. Why did I do that? I was in high school wrestling, had a bad hip injury, did what I needed to do, went to the medical doctors. What they do, they shot my hip with corticosteroids. After 3 corticosteroid shots, I was still hurting. I said, what do we do now? They said, we can't do any more. I said, why not? They said, that joint's already going to wear out early. I remember him telling me that after the 3rd shot. It's like, why don't you tell me that the 1st shot? Why don't you tell me to see a chiropractor? You think that was an option? Should have been, but I didn't know about it. I probably wouldn't have an artificial hip. I probably would have only lost 1 step instead of 2 up to this point. But Robin Sharma, best-selling author, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. I like his most recent book, The 8 Forms of Wealth Money Can't Buy. But he says, don't get fit just to, be fit. You need to be fit to create the energy to change the world. And so Einstein said this, everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. And then he talked about the inner conversion of matter and energy, and think about that too, mass and energy. But the second that our energy's gone, the microsecond, the millisecond, the nanosecond, the picosecond, I don't care how you split it down, you're done. It's instant. There is no delay. So then we ask AI, well, what are the signs of failing health? First one, low energy. What's weight changes? Low metabolic energy. What's slow healing? Slow healing energy. What's mood changes? A brain that doesn't have the right energy. So what's irritable? Because I don't have enough energy, I'm going to fire what I can. Those easy fire pathways are fight or flight or anxiety. And then even the digestive issues that are there. So then, brilliant in terms of asking again, what's new out there? Well, all right, what are the top 3 causes of unexplained fatigue? Starts with the mitochondria. Now, mitochondria in a perfect world make 94.4% of human energy. If we're going to have a really intense physical interaction, the first energy, we'll get into energy systems in part 2, you have stored ATP, which gets you about 3 seconds. Next, you've got creatine phosphate, which is 1 enzyme step away from making ATP, and you got about another 3 seconds. So close to all out, well, let's put it as it is. All out, you got 3 seconds. Just a fraction lower than all out, you got 6 seconds. By the time you get to anaerobic glycolysis, anybody care to guess how many steps there are in ATP production in anaerobic glycolysis? Instant energy with ATP, boom, you transfer that phosphate. Creatine phosphate, 1 enzyme step. How about anaerobic? 12 enzyme steps, each dependent upon a nutrient cofactor. When you burn sugar in the absence of oxygen, you make lactic acid, and you get 2 ATP. Anybody care to guess how many units of ATP does it take to neutralize the lactic acid? 6. So you are in energy deficit. But if you go to aerobic, there's over 20 steps in the electron transport chain, each with a nutrient cofactor, but now you're really much, much, much slower in terms of that energy. Why can't you sprint forever? Has anybody in this room ever sprinted until they passed out? You have. And I'll tell you what, it takes a special soul to do that. I'm not tough enough to do that. If I feel I'm going down, it's like, yeah, I don't need to do that, But, yeah, I asked one guy one time, now Ashton's quite good at pushing his body. What was your reason for sprinting till you passed out?
We had to help in football in high school.
You were playing, and you ran hard enough to pass out. All right, I want you on my team, right? That's pretty cool. But now, let's look at the magnificent 7 of trained energy. All of these things are ways that we want to live our life. Well, if you have improved fuel utilization, you're probably going to burn fat, you're probably going to make more efficient energy. I want to get down to here real quick. The better coupling efficiency. What they found out is if you have great mitochondria, you start creating energy in the presence of oxygen, that's aerobic energy, you get 36 ATP. You know what they're guessing the typical person gets in terms of ATP with how their mitochondria is working? About 20. So they're down more than 33% in terms of what they can even achieve because they haven't trained their mitochondria. So just think about that. Imagine you having 33% more energy efficiency. That's available to all of us. Lower energy costs of movement, you get a lot more efficient, increased mitochondrial density. What that means is your cells say, I need more energy. Mitochondria have their own DNA. We get that from our mothers. So the mitochondria say, this cell wants more energy. I'm going to make more mitochondria, more daughter mitochondria. So you start packing those cells with mitochondria. Now everything gets better. Look at the bottom. Finally, higher fat oxidation capacity. That's your most efficient mechanism of energy production. By the way, if you're sitting here, do you want to be efficient or inefficient?
Efficient.
Of course you want to be efficient. Why would you want to burn out your glucose stores, your ATP, your creatine? Then you go, oh, I want to get up and go to the bathroom. Oh, but I don't have energy to do that. No, that wouldn't work very well at all. So if you look, I've had some people that have helped with some of these slides, even though I make most of them. I had a graphic artist, and the first thing used to be focus, and you'll notice that I had to change that. Who's familiar with the concept of flow? You might be or might not be. It's one of my favorite concepts. So let's define it right here. An optimal state of consciousness, that's where it starts. Brain energies can be very, very powerful, where individuals feel and perform their best, characterized by deep focus, effortless action, and a sense of timelessness. Now, on my 50th birthday, one of my NBA players who had had 17 seasons and won a couple championships, nice enough, he came over to play basketball with me and my buddies. Now, it's pretty hard to get into flow when you totally dominate everybody, right? It'd be like Asher going out on Pee Wee football and playing tackle. It's probably not going to be fun for you, nor them. But we also had people that played in Europe on that same court. Had people that had, 4 years as an NCAA starter. And of course, we lined them up against Mike James. And he's like, damn, you guys are serious. Hey, we're out here to have fun. And we also know, Mike, I'm not guarding you, right? Because I already lost a step and you already had 3 on me to start with. But we'll put the people on there that can play you and we'll make it fun for all of us. But think about this flow state for a moment. How many of you have experienced flow? Please, if every hand's not up, get a life, right? Find your connection, find out what you're passionate about. I can get into flow holding any one of my 6 granddaughters. It is so amazing how beautiful they are, how precious they are, how unintoxicated and untainted they are. We love that purity, that goodness, all that is there. But I was in flow the day I was playing with Mike James. I mean, I probably shot 80%. It's like, okay, he says, don't you just wish you could bottle that? Well, I sure do, but here's an interesting question. Michael Jordan, and I asked this question, how much time per week do you think Michael Jordan spent in flow?
For the games.
Throw me a guess. You think he was in flow the whole game?
4th quarter.
You think he was in flow 4 quarters of the game? That would be pretty impressive. He'd probably be that 100-point per game guy, right? Because it was pretty hard to start Michael when he was in flow. But I'll show you what the estimates are. There's no way we really know, but I really like Stephen Kotler. So this first book that I read from him was called The Rise of Superman. And look at the subtitle, Decoding the Science of Ultimate Human Performance. Is there a science of ultimate human performance? Of course there is. How do you get yourself in that state? What is the body, mind, and spirit doing at that moment? So he started the Human Flow Institute. The Art of Impossible was actually his most recent book. So imagine these people at midnight getting a wild hair going, I'm going up in the helicopter. I'm going to jump out with a snowboard strapped to my feet. I'm going to swoosh down these steep mountains in the dark that could kill me, and when they get to the bottom, they high-five their buddies and say, let's do that again. To me, I think that's insane. But you go, how could they possibly do this? Well, athletes are very, very different. Here's one thing you might know. With what we know about neurology, physiology, biochemistry, neuron firing, sensory perception, activation of muscles, is it theoretically possible for a Major League Baseball player to hit a 100-mile-per-hour fastball? Not with what we know about science. You've got to see it, you've got to register it, you've got to make a decision, then you've got to provide a command to the muscles, and it's a very, very long, complex, here it comes, here it comes. If I'm standing there, there's that 100-mile-an-hour, I hear this noise, and I look at it's in the catcher's mitt. How many of you stood in the box with a 100-mile-per-hour fastball? Oh my God! You could probably hit it, could you? No. You, could you hit it?
Maybe 25%.
Okay. That's epic, right? You playing the big leagues? College anyways?
Yeah.
100 that's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, you throw 70 and I'm going, oh my God, 100? No way. So what happens is athletes have learned these amazing biohacks. If you once, I'm a big fan of fighting. It's my favorite way to train right now, but Muhammad Ali, you look at him and he's dodging punches. He looks like he's about doing this, having a little dance. And the punch goes there, and the punch goes there, and the punch goes there, and the punch goes there. It's like, how did that miss? Someone threw 10 punches in 1.3 seconds, and you just look like they were nothing. Athletes slow time. Their brain works on a faster level. They take much more snapshots. So I worked on a New York Yankee. He was a good fastball hitter. And I said, I've heard you guys have the ability to slow time. He says, me and one of my buddies were talking about that the other day. We got that 100-mile-per-hour fastball, and we have to discipline ourselves to wait on it. What? I'm swinging with the arms back here if I have a shot at it. So he hasn't even released it. It's going to be 100% luck for me to hit that. But what's he doing? Waiting. Okay, now I can swing. And he said literally to him, it feels that way. Isn't that interesting? But we can achieve what's impossible step by step. And now they've identified in the lab the precise neurochemistry of flow. So it's going to be norepinephrine, that's kind of excitatory, dopamine, which is focus, anandamide, they call it the bliss molecule. Think about it, when you're in flow, you ought to be in bliss, time ought to fly, you ought to be totally in the moment, loving everything that you're there. Oxytocin, by the way, is kind of like the cuddling hormone, that's probably more for like team sport. But you want to have that kind of bonding where there's that synergy there. Endorphins for pain control, serotonin for happy. But when we look at these ultimate benefits of flow, look at all 8 of those and see if you wouldn't strive for that every moment of your existence. Now, you can't have flow every moment, but I believe we can get into flow more often than we do. So there's different principles that allow it. Probably number 1 is challenge, skill, balance. If someone really doesn't belong in the same league as you, it's pretty boring to play, isn't it? Sometimes, I shouldn't throw my wife under the bus, but she'd want to ask me to play tennis. And I used to be pretty competitive at tennis. And so if I have to dink it to you, and take everything off my serve, I can probably do that for 5 minutes, But when I'm playing someone that's pushing me to the limit, man, we can go 3 sets, tiebreaker, and I don't even know that the time has flown. We definitely want to challenge and match the skill. Archery, by the way, they say has the top requirement for flow, absolutely immediate feedback. If you even breathe wrong, you're missing the target. If you don't have the right tension, you're missing the target. If you don't have the right focus, you're missing the target. And then you get to shoot, you go, okay, I hit it or I didn't. Now, the people that train mental toughness, they also are big fans of self-talk. You hit the bullseye, you go, yeah, that's like me. You miss it a little, you go, no, that's not me. That's not me. I'm the guy that hits it center every time, and then maybe you take a step back and go, you know what? I noticed I exhaled when I did that. I held too much tension in my fingers to let go of that. It's pretty amazing how all of that matters. Now, here's the major question. with references there. What do you think? Is it easier for fit people to get into flow? Yes or no?
Yes.
Wouldn't that make sense? Their body's already working more efficiently. There's a better integration of the body, mind, and spirit. And this says you have 45% greater probability of getting into flow when you are fit. So just because I like things, you know, that I don't know, I want little value adders, and I want to know, okay, who am I competing with? How much time did these guys spend in flow? So Elon is the richest guy on the planet right now. You start looking at it and you ask him, what drives you? He says, I just want to solve big problems for the world. So his electric car company, that was about making more efficient energy. It wasn't really just cars. He had to solve the battery problem. The mechanics of the car, people had solved that 100 years ago. The battery, not even close. So what did he do? He got a battery that would work so much better. Space flight, well, why not make a reusable rocket? Well, that sounds kind of ridiculous. How about having one that can be caught, right? And if you watch his videos, that's what they're there. And when people were trapped on a space station and we couldn't rescue them, he goes, that's no big deal, I'll go rescue them. And he did, in a day. That's pretty cool. But look how much time Elon spends in flow. 5 to 20 hours a week. Now, here's an interesting question. How many hours a week does Elon work? He typically says 120. Now, how many of you are passionate enough to consistently work 120 hours a week? Oddly enough, I'm not. I have that many other passions. I want time with kids and family and friends and sport. Then Steve Jobs, 5 to 15 hours a week. So on the low end, it's less than an hour a day. On the high end for Musk, some days 3 hours, and that's of a 16-hour day. Michael Jordan, 5 to 10 hours a week during the NBA season. I promise you he didn't flow every moment on the court, but I also promise you he probably did more than just about anybody else. You know, you start throwing in Kobe in there, and you know, maybe you got some interesting competition, and there's Ali slipping a punch, and he doesn't look the least bit worried. 5 to 8 hours a week. Now, why did I pick these? Jordan, the best basketball player of all time. Ali, the best athlete of the last century. Musk, the best right now in terms of contributing to society. And Steve Jobs changed everything. So why don't we shoot for that as a marker, right? So how many do you think you spend 5 minutes a day in flow? That's not many hands. So how about we bump it up from there? So let's try to get into flow for a moment, and you figure out what moment you want that to be. There's your reference on archery. So now what are the top nutrients of flow? Well, interesting enough, water. So in Chinese medicine, water is youth. When the sperm meets the egg, it's essentially 100% water. And with each passing decade, there's less and less and less water. Now, if you're going to put water in your body, would it make sense to be clean water? But here's an interesting phenomenon. Distilled water is killed water. If you're not getting your water cleaned before you drink it, here's what we know. All the crap that's in the groundwater, the herbicides, the insecticides, the fungicides, the glyphosates, the pharmaceuticals, the heavy metals, the toxins, you're getting them. So it doesn't say toxic water. What it really should say is clean water. Then we're going to go, and by the way, the brain is the most hydrated organ in the body. We'll show you the effects of dehydration on the brain. And here's an interesting question. How many of you are less hydrated than when you were born? Every hand ought to be up. How many of you are less hydrated than you were 2 decades ago? How many of you will likely be less hydrated in another 2 decades? Right? And then ultimately, we're not here anymore. We're completely dehydrated. So Chinese medicine matches that, but we want to optimize the water. The brain is 77% water. Then we're going to go with omega-3s. If I were to ask you, of the fat that's in the brain, first of all, what's the highest fat tissue in the body? Adipose. Sorry, that's number 1. What's number 2? The brain. How much of the brain is DHA? In ideal circumstances. I'll show you the reference. 97%. 97%. Now here's an interesting question. If we did nutrition surveys, how much of this population is deficient in DHA? Or I might ask, who's optimal in DHA? Very, very few, and no one in this environment that's not supplementing. Think about that for a moment. We're not optimally hydrated. That's easy to prove. We don't have the right omega-3s. Next is going to be magnesium. Magnesium is estimated to be responsible for about 80% of different enzyme reactions. And yet we're profoundly magnesium deficient. So how many were in the nutrition talk? Lundell, Brandon yesterday, right? And how many were at Dan Murphy? I love both those guys, right? So Dr. Lundell came up with an optimal. He says your red cell magnesium needs to be at least 6.5. So I started going through my labs. I didn't have that as my optimal before. And I can count on one hand the number of labs where I've seen magnesium in that level. So now what kind of magnesium do you want to take? Well, this one, why do you think it's called Quad Mag? 4 different chelates of magnesium, and not those that are not bioavailable. Some people take magnesium to go to the bathroom. Well, that'd be magnesium oxide. You're not going to absorb any of it. It'll stay in your bowel. You're going to go. Mag citrate has benefit above that, but some of it's going to be absorbed. Then you got magnesium malate, magnesium taurate, magnesium glycinate, magnesium aspartate. And all these things have different ability to target different organs in the body. I'm a huge fan of multiple magnesium chelates. B vitamins, that's number 4. The brain is going to need a lot of Bs. I'm not aware of a single neurotransmitter that doesn't have both B vitamins and magnesium in the making of it. So if you're going to convert an amino acid to a neurotransmitter, you need to have enough magnesium. People are profoundly magnesium deficient. You need to have not only B vitamins, but activated form of B vitamins. So how many people out there are poor at activating folic acid? 1 in 3 in this population have just a methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase issue. But guess what? Natural forms of folic acid, well, folic acid doesn't exist in nature. It exists as methylfolate. And folate is in foliage greens. Of course, we all eat enough greens, don't we? And if we don't, we go with dynamic fruits and greens, which sometimes, by the way, are a different color. You could get greens that are actually red, that are purple, that are orange, because all these great phytonutrients with all these benefits are there. And part of what I recommend for everybody is every color, every day. Antioxidants are going to be in those greens, but oxidation is how we make energy. Without it, we don't get there, but when we make energy, now we've got to neutralize essentially the fire and the smoke that we've created. Vitamin D, which is a global deficiency, and interestingly enough, caffeine. How many of you feel a performance boost with caffeine? Who doesn't? If someone doesn't, they probably just aren't processing the caffeine as efficiently as we'd like. But now we start looking at dehydration and performance. If you lose 2% body weight, you're going to lose your aerobic performance 3 to 7%. You're going to have slower decision making, reduced accuracy. Think about that. Most sport, most life requires good decision making, and why not be accurate? I remember training with a grandmaster, and he asked me, he says, what's the most important thing about a punch? And I thought, well, it's got to be power, it's got to be technique, it's got to be delivery, it's got to be not putting yourself vulnerable. He says, so what if you threw the best punch in the world and it hit the guy right here? You know, you miss him by a lot. What's that going to serve? Accuracy has got to be there. The right position punch in the right spot, 100x more effective. Now, decreased aerobic power, decreased anaerobic power, decreased muscle strength, all these things happen in a dehydrated state. As little as 1% loss in hydration, and here's the scary thing for everybody in this room, how many of you think you're not 1% less hydrated than you were when you were 20? Unless you're 21. I promise you are. Probably more like 2, 3, 4. So why don't athletes go forever? This may be it. They just don't have the hydration to run the brain and body like they previously did. And that was like that Rocky movie, right? So Creed, it was Creed. Apollo Creed's son asked Rocky, how'd you beat my dad? He said, well, I didn't beat your dad. He says, no, I saw the film, you beat my dad. He says, no, Father Tom was the guy that married my wife and I. Father Time beat your dad. So now we look, 1% dehydration. Yeah, your cognitive decline is about 3%. By the time you get to 4%, you're at 20% cognitive decline. But here's what I'll probably tell you. Most people in this room are probably 4% less hydrated than they were when they were 20. We've got to always support good fluids, good nutrition. Water was the first thing for the brain. So now they look at sweat, and by the way, this graph it actually shows what I want to show, but not in the way I want to show it. So I just flipped it a little bit and made the mirror image. The more you sweat, the more you decrease your blood volume, bottom line. So do you think blood volume has to do with how well you're oxygenating tissues in your body? Well, try it. What if we let that go to 0? You're gone. But here's what they also found. They compared sweat to a diuretic. And when you sweat, your body knows how to sweat, and your performance drops much, much less, and your blood volume drops much less. When you take a diuretic, it's like, yeah, I'm pulling out fluid, I don't care. And that can cause you some really big problems. So there's your reference there. 97% of the omega-3 fatty acid in the brain is DHA. And what are the benefits? Enhanced cognition and memory, and then reduce inflammation, mood stabilization, reduce cognitive decline. All those things are there, but you didn't bring resolvins up here. But how many people are familiar with resolvins? I think this is something that if you walk away from this conference with only this data, I've lectured at, oddly enough, major pharmaceutical conferences. The entire topic was resolvins. There's over 2,000 published medical studies on resolvins. And I tell stories because stories stick, but Dr. Sirhan, years ago, was a Harvard PhD, and he was a big fan of omega-3s. Now, we've known since the 60s that omega-3s prevent heart attack, stroke, and cancer by 13 different mechanisms. It started with an observation. The Inuit Eskimos, their diet was 80% fat, and they were trying to demonize fat back then. Don't eat fat, low fat, non-fat. Well, what they found out is the highest fat diet, lowest incidence of cardiovascular disease. How could that be? Well, these omega-3 fats promote health in so many different ways, I don't even think we quantified them yet. But Dr. Sirhan said, well, maybe there's more to the story. So he took radioactive labeled omega-3 and he injected it into animals. And then he'd expose them to different stressors, toxins, infectious agents, cancer, physical trauma. And he found out that the animals that recovered the fastest actually converted the omega-3s to a form that he ultimately termed resolvin. It was a whole new category of molecule derived from omega-3. Now, there's also a few derived from omega-6s as well. But then he asked the question, I wonder if humans have something similar. And we do. Same type of thing. The humans that made the best resolvins, the most resolvins, everything resolved faster. And then he said, okay, what if, since the body can do this with a few enzyme steps, what if we find a way to do it in the lab, convert the omega-3 to resolvin? It was a 15-year process, but they got it down. And where it was magic, they said, all right, now what if we give the resolvins to humans? Will they get that resolving effect? 2,000 plus published studies now show that yes, you give resolvins, things resolve faster. So notice what it says. Resolvins specifically resolve inflammation, offering more direct impact for the brain, because we talk about flow. Resolvins act at a nanomolar concentration, so it doesn't take much at all. And then I asked AI, would the resolvin form of omega-3 be more likely to get you in a flow? And the answer is yes. And pretty much indisputable. And this was a very big article. So we probably see a lot of people in our clinic like this. diabetes, heart disease, cancer, depression, autoimmunity, neurodegeneration, loss of muscle and bone, loss of the immune system. Well, if you look at this closely, I call it the deadly quartet. Stress, toxins, malnutrition, physical inactivity, all create what's SCI, systemic chronic inflammation, that is the bridge between a bad choice and a bad condition of your body. So notice what it says. Systemic chronic inflammation leads to several diseases that collectively represent leading causes of disability and death worldwide. What if we could make a bridge from what was going over here, bad choice, inflammatory process to decline, from injury, bad choice, to inflammatory process to repair, and that's what the resolvents do. So that is a staple in my office and part of what I recommend for everyone. Now we look at what are the signs of magnesium deficiency or even suboptimal magnesium. Notice the first one, poor cognitive processing. It's going to be very hard for you to be your very best if your brain isn't its best. We need that water. We need that omega-3. We need that resolvent form of omega-3. We need the right amount of magnesium. And magnesium in plants is much more bioavailable than other stuff that's out there. Now, this is going to be just behind. So I still will supplement with the quad magnesium. Magnesium is the central molecule of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the lifeblood of plants. The more plants, and by the way, how many people out there do you think get enough plants? What are the statistics? It's about 1 in 15. Are you that 1 in 15? Do a scoop of that, you're closer. Do 2 scoops, you're there. Much, much easier to do. What about B vitamins for brain health? Everything related to brain, we could say B is for brain. You get the right Bs, you're there. But guess what? People don't get enough Bs. They don't absorb B12. They don't activate folic acid. They don't activate B6. Now, if you're getting natural forms, you don't have to activate them. And by the way, there are activated forms of B1, B2, B3, 5, B6, B7, B9, B12. And then some companies like to talk about B11, B13, B15, B17. Those all exist, but they're just not essential for human health. What about antioxidants in flow? Again, it's going to start out with our wonderful brain. And what's the last thing we had? Enhanced energy. The brain requires more energy than anything else. How about vitamin D? You know, I listened to the speaker yesterday, and he shared something. He said he didn't think people should go above 50 for vitamin D. And he says, based on this article, I pulled up that article, I don't read it the same at all. My first degree is electrical engineering, hard background in science. I can read a study, I can tell you probability, and I can tell you from patient experience, I don't think 50 is even close. And I brought it up to him. I said, I think you misread that. I'd encourage you to do it again. He says, no, I'll show you the data where I made my conclusion. All right. Hey, we're up for difference of opinions, but I want everybody running 100 to 120 of vitamin D. And I was at a conference last fall where there's a guy that works with elite geriatric athletes. Guess where he wants their vitamin D levels? Between 400 and 500. I was at a conference earlier this year, and a guy prepares people for chemo. He's got a very integrated cancer clinic. Where do you think he wants their vitamin D level before chemo? 400 minimum. And he says the patients do a lot better. So how much do we know about nutrition toxicity? All we need to know, it doesn't exist. Now, would you be surprised if there was some literature out there that said, you don't need vitamin D, you don't need omega-3, you don't need B vitamins, you just need our drugs. You think there might be some of that going on out there? Nothing could be further from the truth. Nutrition and toxicity are oxymorons. They don't exist. And when people are saying, oh yeah, well, you know, people are food toxic. Well, that's not nutrition toxic. And I'll even go with that. There's not such a thing as junk food. There's junk and there's food. They're junk toxic. Food is not toxic. Junk is. Andrew Huberman, anybody listen to Huberman? Pretty sharp character out of Stanford, goes and takes people in the lab. Huge fan of caffeine and coffee. So caffeine is going to increase dopamine, that's focus, that's joy, that's fine motor control. Acetylcholine, which is memory. By the way, it also increases epinephrine, norepinephrine for more pick-me-up. It puts the body in a more lipolytic or fat-burning state. And then chocolate, and I'm an investor in a coffee company, so I'll put that up there. And reach out to me if you want some, but chocolate enhances all the neurotransmitters of flow. Cleanest coffee in the world, and it also has reishi mushroom in it, which is proven for brain and body benefits. If you're a coffee drinker, I'm going to encourage you to be more diligent. Very interesting study, Toxicology Reports 2022, 90% of coffee samples tested have heavy metals. Now there's companies that want to do good, Four Sigmatic, go look up their lawsuit. They're being sued for lead in their coffee. Now I promise you they didn't put it in there. They just didn't screen to make sure it wasn't there. If 90% of coffee has heavy metals, what's the probability that coffee you're buying has heavy metals? 90%, unless the company screens it. Pesticide residues, 70%. That could be herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, even glyphosate, which the medical literature lists as an autism accelerator. Mycotoxins in molds, 50%. Now, as a math major, I could do the math, but it's easier to type in with AI. If there's a 90% probability that a cup of coffee has metals, a 70% that has pesticide residues, and a 50% probability that has molds or mycotoxins, what's the probability that any cup of coffee out there has any one of the three? Check my math. Feel free to do that. 94%. 94 out of 100 cups of coffee are poisoning people in some way. So ours is certified clean, just like everything that Nutridyne offers. They're going to test the raw materials. They're going to make sure it doesn't have these contaminants. They're going to make sure that once they create it, it meets label claim. They're going to do accelerated aging. They're going to do all the things they need to do to make sure you get the best product out there. And guess what? All these things do what? They cost money. So what happens is there's a lower profit margin. Compare that to a company where they can stamp a pill for a penny and sell it for $100. If you're in business, what do you want to do? Probably stamp the pill for a penny. So that's going to be our flow. Our fuel, we start looking at energy, 4 different energy systems. I've told people for years you want to train your energy systems, all of them, but proportionately to what you're going to need for the demands of your sport. So interestingly enough, I treated London Fletcher, who ended up number 4 all-time NFL in tackles. And you know, when he came to see me, he had a little bit of a knee problem. He says, "Doc, if I could get 1 more year, I'd be happy." Well, we got him 5 more, number 4 all-time, and 50 million more in his bank account. Do you think that was a worthwhile visit? Now, here's the next question. My elites, all of them, how many of them do you think came to me because exclusively I'm a good chiropractor? I'm even going to say that I believe there are better chiropractors in this room than me, right? Those of you that have that experience, you can touch a person, you can see it, you can feel it, you can gently put it in position. I'm still working on that, even though I'm pretty good at it. So I'm a good chiropractor. I'm a really good kinesiologist. Someone might be a little bit better. I'm good at connecting people to their body, showing the muscular imbalance, and we'll show people in the room what that works like. I'm a really good nutritionist. Why? Because for me, that was the biggest breakaway. That was the biggest thing that changed my life. Now, when I got into nutrition, I had nowhere to go but up. You know, I was a teen eating French fries, believe it or not, burgers and chocolate shakes. And I was living on that crap. And my dad would keep telling me, "Son, you keep eating like that, you're going to pay a price." Well, I got into college. I was playing in an intramural football league and, you know, doing too much time studying, not enough time in the gym. And I'm like, crap, I'm out of shape. You know, this really sucks. So I said, you know what? I'm going to eat good for a week and see what happens. Well, that's 43 years later since I did that experiment. And it worked out so powerfully, I thought I would be stupid to not honor my body with that which fuels it and calms it and nourishes it and helps it to achieve balance. But every fiber type, every energy system proportional to the demands of the event. So London Fletcher, I asked him, I said, "What do you do during the off season?" You know, he says, "I jog 3 miles 3 times a week." And I looked at London, I said, how often do you jog on the football field? And he said, you don't jog on the football field. I said, then why would you expect to prepare yourself for the next season by jogging? And I said, why not just do 10 sprints? You know, maybe 3 10 meters, 3 20 meters, 3 40 meters, and 1 100. How many times in your career as a pro did you sprint 100 yards on the football field?
80 yards for kickoff.
80 was your top.
Like kickoff.
Yeah, kickoff. So think about that for a moment. Even the best of the best, it's a 100-yard field, but man, it's once in a career you do that. If you're lucky. How many guys have taken it to the house 100+ yards? We can probably count them on 2 hands. Pretty impressive, but more practical is that 10-yard sprint, that 20-yard sprint. If you really get burned that 40-yard sprint, we don't want that to happen too often. Now, then we start looking at the energy demands for the body to recover in response to what I'm going to call multi-trauma. Could we call this multi-trauma? You better believe it, we could. Why do you think the NFL life expectancy is like 4 years? I mean life expectancy, career expectancy. These guys are getting hit by the best of the best that they want them to know they've been hit. Ouch, right? But there's tough guys that can show up and do that all the time. So now we start looking at fuel. So at rest, 65% fat, 35%, 33% carbohydrate, 2% protein. Protein does prime the pump. When you're at moderate activity, that's going to switch a little bit. Look what happens when you're at high intensity intervals. That's what HIIT stands for. You're burning 85% carbohydrate. Now let me ask you a question. Are you doing it in the presence of oxygen or anaerobically? If you're highly intense, is that aerobic or anaerobic? That's anaerobic. So now you're burning that molecule of sugar, carbohydrate, and you're only getting 2 ATP. Let's go back an hour or so. What else do we create when we create energy from sugar in the absence of oxygen?
Lactic acid.
Lactic acid, and it takes 6 units of ATP to neutralize the lactic acid. It's actually the lactic acid that'll slow you down, and we'll get to acid-alkaline balance soon, far before you're going to run out of fuel. Now, interesting enough, there's a guy named Paul Saladino. He's a carnivore MD, and he lived only on red meat, salt, and water for a period of time, like Jordan Peterson and his daughter, and he actually did a triathlon. It was a marathon. But how crazy. So he somehow was able to burn 70 to 75% fat. Here's a question for you. Do you burn fat aerobically or anaerobically? It's required to be aerobic. So this was not a fast marathon. If you want to do a fast marathon, you're not going to do it keto. You need those carbs anaerobically to make your energy. And notice they also burn 20 to 25% protein. Pretty significant. So if you're an elite athlete wanting to maintain your mass, you probably don't want to do carnivore. With that said, you want to be very selective about always having quality carbohydrates. So now, these are the main mitochondrial nutrients. Now, if we start looking at that list, you'll see some of them are required for flow. The magnesium, the Bs. Iron is going to be critical for the central molecule of hemoglobin. And you're also then going to know that vegans have less iron. They have a harder time with bioavailable iron, a harder time with protein. It's not ideal for athletes. Sulfur is important for detoxification. Coenzyme Q10 is not a vitamin. We make it. But we have to be able to have healthy tissue to make it. Vitamin C, vitamin E, etc. So then we start looking at HIIT exercise, and you're not burning fat when you're training intensely, but notice what it says. You are actually going to have greater fat burning for 6 to 24 hours post-exercise. So let me ask you a question. You do an aerobic workout when you're burning fat. During that workout, does it enhance your fat burning after that? No, it doesn't. You do a HIIT exercise, and there's a protocol called a Tabata. It's only 4 minutes, but it's all out. 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. You turn yourself into a more powerful fat-burning machine for up to 24 hours. Now, we know there's different categories of athletes. The primary needs of the endurance athletes Oxygen, water and minerals, mitochondrial efficiency, all those things are there. CrossFit is going to be most of us out there. They are going to need anti-inflammation. I threw in omega-3s, but I should put down the resolving form of omega-3. Why whole food? Because anything that's not is going to be pro-inflammatory. Lots of repair nutrients, they're breaking down things a lot. Glycolysis, because we're burning sugar in the absence of oxygen, and then we're going to have our acid-alkaline buffering. Then we have the strength athlete. Eat muscle to grow muscle is some of the best words that I've known. You want to have enough protein, 1.8 grams per kilogram, which is less than a gram per pound of body. I know plenty of athletes that go beyond that, especially now with a lean towards keto carnivore. And we always just need to make sure that they're drinking enough water, getting enough cofactors, other things to process that all out. They're going to have a lot of fast energy, so creatine phosphate works really, really well for these athletes as well as the brain. You want to have anabolic hormones. Now, interestingly enough, what anabolic hormone is most under our control? Insulin. Insulin is anabolic and anti-catabolic. So a University of Texas researcher years ago wrote a book called Nutrient Timing. And he said, you know what? Carbs are great when you've earned them. He said, so you do some hard training, you burn that glycogen out, and then immediately post-workout, your body will hyper-respond and allow you to store that. Now, what if it doesn't hyper-respond? Guyton's textbook of medical physiology says this: any excess carbohydrate is rapidly converted to triglyceride and stored in adipose tissue. When you're insulin resistant, oh my God, you're doing that a lot more. You can't store fat without insulin, more fat storage. But we want to do the right amount of insulin at the right time. We want to buffer cortisol. We want to enhance growth hormone. And then when we start looking at testosterone, what's happened to testosterone around the world? Why? Estrogens in plastics, estrogens in pesticides, estrogens injected into animals. We've intoxicated the male species where it's hard to find a man who actually functions like a man. It's pathetic. And here's the problem. When you stop functioning like a man, your drive to be a man goes away too. That testosterone's driving your brain, it's driving your dopamine. And you go, yeah, I don't care. Yeah, that's what happens when you have no testosterone. You don't care. Not a good place to be. David Katz and I co-lectured at a conference years ago. He had this very interesting idea that they just ought to put red, yellow, and green stickers on food in the store. Red, avoid this, except for very, very minimum. That'd be like a Twinkie. Green, eat all this that you want. Now, I used to say that my rule in nutrition was green is good and it's hard to get too much. But guess what? There's a number of people out there now that there are certain greens that are very aggravating to them. Do you think the green is bad, or do you think their gut microbiome is bad?
Okay.
So now they suggest that 90% of all illness is related to gut and microbiome. A very, very powerful statement from David Katz. With nearly 8% of adults now overweight, children more apt to be harmed over their lifetime by the way they eat than tobacco, drugs, and alcohol combined. Do you think parents know that when they're feeding kids this crap that has no value for their body? So this is about a half a dozen Nobel Prize winning studies. Eat real food, not fake food. Eat clean food, not intoxicated food. Not too much, not too often. That's calorie restriction, intermittent fasting. Both have been related to longevity. Every color, why? Because every color has a different nutrient blend every day, because we should eat something every day in a way that honors your genetics, your physiology, and your body goals, mostly plants. I was on a podcast, pretty good viewership, and the guy said, wait a minute, mostly plants, all these people are talking about carnivore. I said, have you ever met a carnivore? How many humans here have been exclusively carnivore their entire life? How many humans throughout the history of the planet have been carnivore over their entire life? How many carnivore centenarians, people over 100, are there? We all can name them by name. We can tell them their street address. In fact, if we talk to ourselves, we could say, yeah, I had a fake conversation. There aren't any. Now I'm hoping for Michaela Peterson, because she went through a heck of a ride, Jordan Peterson's daughter, but we start out carnivore because we have mother's milk, And we quickly transitioned to omnivore, which is where we should say, by the way, we're not vegan either. We are omnivores. Now, some people do better with a lot more plants, and there are 100-year-olds that adopted a vegan lifestyle, but they weren't born vegan. They wouldn't be here if they were, because no mother's milk, they were going to die 100 years ago. So this was the journal Advances in Therapy. They took people that were age-matched, health-matched. They gave one group they gave both groups a really good diet, organic, macronutrient balanced. The other group got diet and supplementation. At the start of the study, they biopsied the tissue to see, okay, how many nutrients are actually in the tissue itself. And then they gave them the amino acids as well, and the vitamins and minerals. Well, they went and they biopsied the tissue a few months later, and they found out those that had the great diet alone, their nutrient status didn't improve at all, and in some cases even declined. But the people that got supplementation, across the board, their nutrient status improved. So the conclusion from the article was food is too weak to replete depleted cells and bodies. Therefore, supplementation is advisable for everybody. Paul Saladino, interesting guy to look up. You can do a marathon on carnivore, you just can't do it optimally. We start looking at the acid-alkaline buffers. It's probably going to be the CrossFit athlete that needs this more. The aerobic athlete doing it right is going to be aerobic, making less acid. The CrossFit athlete, they're high intensity. They're going to make a lot of this athlete. And most of the sports that we watch, baseball would be the exception, are anaerobic. Basketball is anaerobic. Football is anaerobic. Gymnastics is anaerobic. I guess archery could be aerobic. But we start looking at these acid-alkaline buffers, and I read a book decades ago called Alkalize or Die, and I thought, you know what, that makes sense. As the body accumulates metabolic acid, all physiologic processes slow down. That's how come you passed out when you ran. You just had too much acid that said, you can't go any further, you're risking yourself. So, rather than alkalize or die, I said, why not alkalize and thrive? So this is a European journal in chronic acidosis, and here's what I'm going to argue. We all have that to some degree. We all have that to some degree. A nutrition intervention with alkalizing nutrients, with alkalizing food supplements, is not optional. It's absolutely necessary. Yes, sir.
Is there any science out there that proves that alkaline water actually gets into the cells and alkalizes?
I think some would argue that there are, but let me tell you my history of alkalizing water. So a couple of decades ago in office, I could use a device called a bioterrain analyzer. Very, very precisely calibrated. I could measure the pH, the electrical resistance, the oxidation reduction potential of blood, saliva, and urine. And I also knew the patterns, and I taught full-day seminars about that. Now, why don't I do that anymore? Our government made that illegal. Government's been to my office 5 times. What's my crime? Helping sick people without drugs. Why am I censored? I help sick people without drugs. Oh well, I'm still thriving, right? I'm okay with that. And I think the world is starting to swing in my direction. So I'd have people say, I want to do an experiment. I'm going to drink a gallon of alkaline water a day. And I had a bunch of people do this. And congratulations, I want all of us to drink a gallon of high quality water a day. That would be really, really nice. But when I looked at the buffers, when I looked at the systems, when I looked at blood, saliva, and urine, how much change did I see in pH from that gallon of water a day? I saw none. So here's a very interesting thing. When we make acid, when oxygen goes into the cell, carbon dioxide comes out. Carbon dioxide adds some water to form carbonic acid. We've got 100 trillion cells doing that 1 trillion times a day. Now in the pharmacy literature, and there is some good pharmacy literature because they're looking at acid alkaline, they want to find their drugs to deal with metabolic acidosis, which will kill you. But they estimate that we make about 15,000 units, whatever that unit is. It might have been 15,000 millimoles per liter or something like that, but it was 15,000 units a day. Guess how much food adds or subtracts from that acid-alkaline balance over the course of a day? 60 to 80 units. So does food increase acid burden? Almost not at all. Does it improve our buffering against acid? If it's high quality, it absolutely does. So here's what I tell people. Food contributes very little to acid alkaline buffering or to acid burden, but the right type of food makes you a really good buffer against it. So alkalinity does promote muscle mass. That is one of the things that was shown there. How about bone density? The guy asked yesterday, what depletes bone? Well, he wanted to answer inflammation. That's partially true, but inflammatory process is going to be huge with that. Acid alkaline is going to be huge with that. Not the right kind of protein. Bone has over 200 proteins. Not the right amount of minerals. Bone has a dozen minerals. And by the way, what does the mineral density have to do with the health of the bone? Almost nothing. I've got 80-something-year-old patients that are told they have osteopenia, but they fall, and instead of their brittle bone breaking, it bends because they still have the protein within it. Isn't that fascinating? Does a kid break their bone? I promise you that bone is much less mineralized than the adult, but it's got that great flexible protein within it. So every hormone and enzyme, and this is a very accurate representation of the curve, how much latitude do you have before you start being severely impaired? It's said that you will not live below 7.10. Blood is 7.35 to 7.45. That's a pretty narrow window. Every hormone, every enzyme is pH dependent. So, notice what this says. Enzyme and hormone function decline rapidly with any alteration in pH. And they're even calling alkaline, 7.34, they're calling that acidosis. It certainly is more acid than ideal. Now, acid-alkaline imbalance is so common. I really love this when I could precisely measure it with bioterrain. I'd say, here's your problem. You're very inefficient. So I might have a woman come in, she says, listen, all my hormone values are normal, but I know I'm hypothyroid. My doctor says, no, you're not. Look at your values. Well, beyond a given pH, it might take twice as much of the same hormone to induce an equal response at the set point. So if your acid alkaline's not right, your testosterone's not right, your estrogen's not working right, your insulin's not working right, your growth hormone's not working right, your thyroid hormone's not working right, we've got to change that pH. So here's a graph of an elite sprinter, and the first 3 seconds are stored ATP. That's out of the gate, out of the blocks. The next 3 seconds are going to be creatine phosphate, creating only one enzyme step. Then notice what happens when they go to anaerobic glycolysis. We've only got 6 seconds, that's at 60 meters. They start dropping off, and I call that the lactic acid decline. So Tyson Gay comes in, and he comes in prior to, and I'll play this because it's not going to have any sound anyway, so it's not going to disrupt me talking over it. I think I saw him in 2010. That was my promo picture back then. So we're 15 years later. But there's Coach Eric Francis, Jeremy Wade, Tyson Gay, Aaron Armstrong. All of these guys are Olympians. And Coach Francis says, he says, you know what? There's a reason we're here. He said, every single athlete that I've brought to Dr. Bob has had a personal best or season best within 2 weeks. So there's Tyson Gay. Tyson Gay leading. Usain Bolt training by a meter. Tyson Gay, is he going to do it? Is he going to do it? He wins. Tyson Gay wins. Who had this on their radar? I sure didn't. Wow. Yeah, that's what the guy said. Hey, have I heard that 100 times? Sure. Because Tyson just happened to be in my office a few weeks before that. And he has tried he signed $1 million contract before his sweat trial. So that was pretty cool. So I asked Coach, what's your goal? He says, well, it's Project World Record, right? Well, we didn't get there. Now Tyson, God bless him and his family, but in the peak of his career, his 15-year-old daughter was killed in a drive-by shooting. Oh my. How does anybody bounce back from that? I don't know. But what did we do at Tyson? We did hourly doses of alkalizing nutrients, and we did use dynamic fruits and greens. And Ganoderma is known as the most alkaline food on the planet. We use that as well, and that's how we're able to get there. Cortisol resistance. How many people are familiar with cortisol resistance? Not just by the term. So here's a quote from the medical literature. Many, if not all, New World primates have elevated cortisol resistance. Bodies ignore constant stimuli. If you're constantly under stress, your body says, I need to protect myself from that. It actually stops responding to cortisol to some degree. What's the first thing that shuts off when you become cortisol resistant? Inflammatory control. What's one of the biggest things that messes with health, happiness, longevity, performance? Inflammation. If we're stressed out of our mind and our cortisol doesn't work anymore, we've got to do what I call a cortisol reset. In the medical literature, they talk about anti-inflammatory therapy being absolutely mandatory because they're not going to survive with cortisol resistance in a critically ill state. How about this? National Geographic or Psychology Today. Good news, stress is going to kill you, but it's going to take longer than ever. Oh, great. More time to be miserable. Severe psychological stress will kill in a dose-related fashion, is what they're saying. 2021, 75 to 90% of all doctor visits related to too much stress. Melatonin, I will seriously disagree with the speaker yesterday. He says we don't need much melatonin. If you do, maybe take a milligram every other day. I have people take 1 to 2 milligrams every waking hour. I'll often have them take them 20, 30 milligrams at bedtime with high-dose vitamin D3 K2 combo, because the National Institutes of Health over 2 decades ago tried high-dose melatonin and D3 with end-stage cancer patients who were sent home to die, and in every case minimized lean tissue breakdown and significantly increased survivability. If it can do that for the worst of the worst, melatonin has no known toxicity. The gut makes 400 times the melatonin as the brain. Melatonin is a mitochondrial specific antioxidant. It's great for adrenal insufficiency. I do it every working hour. It's anti-cancer by at least 10 proven mechanisms, and our ability to make melatonin declines with age. Reishi is something I also use. It lowers serum cortisol. Theanine, an amino acid in green tea, is a natural GABA facilitator. It promotes calmness without promoting drowsiness. 200 to 400 milligrams a day, very, very powerful there. The Ganoderma will actually reduce the amount of circulating cortisol. And I tell people, go to PubMed. Don't take my word for anything at all. You look at melatonin, you're going to find out that this is phenomenal for the adrenal glands, phenomenal for stress. Theanine, very, very calming to the brain and has other body benefits. And then Ganoderma is known to calm the body, the mind, and the spirit. And finally, recovery. Sleep right. Anders Ericsson, the best of the best, they would sleep 8.6 hours a night. I love this phrase, a great day starts the night before. Do you have more reason to spend awake at night with mindless entertainment, which most people are doing, or do you want to get to bed, wake up refreshed and ready to take on the world? That's my strategy. I certainly am an early to bed, early to rise guy. Now, what about athletes? 9 to 10 hours per night. Work harder, recover harder. Work harder, recover harder. Stanford did a study on this on their tennis team years ago, and they had a very easy measurement. They looked at the accuracy of first serve, and they made their athletes stay in bed 10 hours a night, lights out, dark. You can be awake, but just lay in bed. And in 2 weeks, they improved their first service performance 17%. 17%. Just by prioritizing sleep. These icons have all prioritized sleep. How many have heard the term mental floss? We've got our glymphatic system. So, one of my mentors said, only floss the teeth you want to keep. If you are not getting good sleep in a fasting state, you are not cleaning your brain. You need to not eat 3 hours before bed, and you need to sleep through that night, and you will clean out the brain. That is the body's detoxification system. Charles Poliquin, God rest his soul, improving sleep gets you more bang for your buck than anything. Finally, we start looking at protein. That's going to be a big part of recovery. The CrossFit athletes need more than endurance, and the power athletes need the most. So what are the best proteins for athletes? Clean meats. And clean would be grass-fed or free-range, fish, eggs, dairy, and then I'm a big fan of whey protein powders. Why? Because it's super easy, and we know if we're getting it from a good company, it's going to be clean. So those are the needs of the athlete. In part 2, we're actually going to bring people up. I'll talk through some of the things that I do. I hope I do it in a way where everybody leaves with something that they can start applying tomorrow morning if you're seeing patients, today if you're ambitious. Any questions about anything? We have 6 minutes.